Welcome to the Low Carb MD podcast. No one is beyond help. No one is beyond hope.
As we have always said, we are bringing you medical information and cutting-edge science, but none of this is medical advice. Please seek out input from your own doctor.
Hello and welcome back to the Low Carb MD podcast. You're stuck with just me today because Tro is having emergency stuff going on with patients. Doctors sometimes have emergencies and that happens. So we have a great guest. I'm so excited to share her with you. And a lot of you probably already know her, Dr. Mindy Pelz, Fast Like a Girl book that I've been recommending to my patients. My wife is doing absolutely outstanding with this. And, people are just noticing, and it's just so much fun to see her just so mental. Just yesterday, we had a discussion about her mental clarity and her workouts and everything. So Dr. Pelz, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. And anyone, if you haven't seen her yet, go listen to Life's Best Medicine. We did a great episode talking about this stuff, and I've really been implementing it with my patients with outstanding results. So Dr. Pelz, welcome.
Oh, I'm so excited to be back talking about this. And I love the updates, especially from a doctor's perspective, as you start to see, as you infiltrate the information into your whole patient base, it's crazy how powerful the body is, and how when a woman's body gets treated the way it wants to be treated, it heals and performs at a whole nother level. So I love hearing the updates on your wife and your patients.
Yeah. And I want to thank you because I after our discussion, I really dove into looking at oxytocin, stress levels and stress hormones and all that. And it's amazing how it's just so neglected, how people just don't really appreciate the effects of stress on our physiology and the gut microbiome. So we had such a great talk. So throw some more wisdom at us.
Well, it's so funny because I don't know if we talked about this the last time, but the New York Times put out an article around menopause and HRT and what we need to know about that. And I can't remember if you and I had this conversation, but in this article, something really hit me, and they blew it up as a big quote in the article, which is, we have a societal acceptance of women suffering. And I think that's an incredible place to start this conversation, is why are we not addressing the health needs of women? And why are we not customizing everything from diet to fasting to exercise to our medication prescriptions to supplementation to detox? Why aren't we customizing that for a woman's hormonal needs? And I think that's like the question that I'm left with, because until we do that, women will continue to suffer. So I'd love to go down that path. And how do we take the healthcare system that is so linear, it's so one size fits all, and then bring into the conversation what the needs of women are, and then really flip it back on women and say, and your responsibility is to understand these hormones and build a lifestyle around it so that you can play your part in your own healthcare journey.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. If you look at a lot of, plus the studies aren't looking at menopausal women for sure. And so they're looking mostly at men. Why? Because we're easier to study, because they go, we're just worried about your testosterone, right? That kind of thing. But when you have hormone fluxes, you have all these different things going on. It's really hard to have a baseline. And that's the problem is, and it's been an interesting journey. And I don't know if you've been following on Twitter, there's been some wars within the low carb community where people are saying, well, you need a high fat version. No, you need a higher protein version. And, really comes down to the individual. I think some people just flourish in one area, depending on where your hormones are, where you are metabolically. I would love to hear your take on that.
Yes. Well, and the microbiome, we got to bring the microbiome into this conversation too, because for both men and women, I'm the one thing I've hit a tolerance on is I can't take when we've got doctors, influencers that are standing up on social media and saying, this is right, this is wrong. There are no absolutes in healthcare, and especially in a woman's healthcare path. So when we look at just the macronutrients, fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, the first thing we have to realize is that it's your microbiome that's going to decide what to do with those three macronutrients, especially when it comes to glucose. So you might have, let's use women as an example. You have a woman that's been on multiple rounds of antibiotics. She's been on birth control for years, and her microbiome is decimated. So when she goes to eat protein, her blood sugar may spike. Whereas another woman hasn't been on all of those things as much, has been really focused on diversifying her diet. When she eats protein, all of a sudden her glucose drops. So for both men and women, we have to, when we look at the macronutrients, we have to realize that there are no absolutes, which is why we all got to start to get to know what food does to what those macronutrients does personally to us, and stop trying to compare ourselves to others, or even look at just, I have a lot of people that say to me, just give me the black and white, just give me the answer. And my response is, I'm teaching you to fish. I'm not giving you fish, so that you can figure out how to do this for yourself for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and that's like such a huge deal, because I see it a lot in my practice where people are so good at something, say carnivore diet, and they're working out hard, and then all of a sudden their numbers start going crazy, and they start having, so they double down and double down and double down, instead of saying, well, let me try adding some carbs in before my period, maybe changing things a little, because we're seeing the effects of high cortisol, stress hormones, and all that. So it's a huge thing. And it's funny because so many in this community have fought against the dietary guidelines, say there's not a one size fits all, but now they're saying there's a one size fits all, but there's not. And that's what's so frustrating for everyone, because they're fighting. And I think we can all agree. It's like, okay, let's cut out the processed food. Let's get rid of the garbage stuff. Let's not drink every night. Let's not be stressed out. Let's get sleep, and all these things that we can agree on, rather than arguing over the minutia at some point.
Yes. Yeah. And if we just take the macronutrient or even looking of carbs and looking at low carb, what I would say is we have to remember that there's lots of versions of keto. So that's the other thing that I'm not sure if you talk about that on this podcast, but one of the things that I see in the keto movement is we're not talking about the nuance of keto. So for example, low keto to me is 10 grams of net carbs. That is a great thing to do if you're really trying to lose weight. For a woman who's cycling, that's great when estrogen's coming in, not great when progesterone's coming in, but it is a really cool weight loss tool. In Fast Like a Girl, I really emphasize that most women should do keto biotic, which is about 50 grams net carbs. Again, great when estrogen comes in. But the reason I added in the biotic piece and up the carbs is because we need to make sure that a woman's eating vegetables, because that feeds the microbiome so she can break estrogen down. Whereas some of the people that I've been working with, we actually have them bring their carbohydrates up to 75 grams so that they can get enough calories to support their thyroid function. So when we start to look at just the ketogenic diet, there's nuance within that needs to be discussed. So again, this is about getting to know yourself and understanding what works for you, and stepping out of looking for that one size fits all, whether it's keto, fasting, supplementation, exercise. There's only one way, and it's your way.
Yeah, and you figure out what works for you and what level of exercise you have to do, and sleep, and all these other factors that come in. And the gut microbiome is such a misunderstood part of it. And I think we have so much more to learn, but it's a really, I've had people say, high level people say, you can't talk about this stuff. There's no data. I was like, there's a lot of data, and we're seeing a lot. And when people improve, and through intermittent fasting, maybe, or doing a 3-day fast, like you recommend trying, and seeing how people do as far as getting their gut microbiome rehabilitated after years of antibiotics and all these other things that we do, and processed food and artificial sweeteners or whatever it might be that affects the microbiome.
Yeah. And something you said about the data, I want to bring this to the surface too, because we've become so obsessed with, well, what does the science say? And I think if you have ever gone and looked at a study, it's crazy, because there are so many things you have to look at before you make a declaration that this is applicable to everybody. For starters, are we looking at the sample size? Like, how many people did they look at? And then secondly, are we looking at what the makeup of that sample size is? And then the third thing, I don't know if you've ever done this, but are you even looking at the lead researchers on them? What's their intention? I've done this on a few articles, and it'll blow your mind away when you go and look at the boards they're sitting on, because a lot of them are sitting on pharmaceutical boards. So it's so convoluted that I feel like we can look at the data and say, that's interesting. Now let me apply it to me. But when we start saying, no, that's not good because the data says this, we have now lost our way, and we will continue to fight over and over and over again about what the best science is and what the right science is, until we start to have a more gentle approach and a more flexible approach to the science that we're all quoting and reading and pontificating about.
Yeah, and that's the point, is there's so many, like we could each individually pick out a study that goes, look, high fat ketogenic diet is the way to go because this study says it, or high protein, low fat is better way to go, or this is better way to go. But it really is going to come down to the individual and what kind of response you're getting. Because if I say this is what you're supposed to do, but their sugars are going crazy all day, and say, well, maybe this is the best approach, right? Or if they're not getting results.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So here's what I like to say is, let's come back to some foundational ideas that we know. I think you could put every doctor in a room and they would agree. And the foundational idea of fasting should actually start with food. The foundational idea around keto should start with food before we even count macros. So, I'm sure you've talked about this. This may be a little trivial and novice for your listeners, but I hope everybody knows we need to be eating good fats, not bad fats. I hope everybody knows nature's carbs are way better than processed carbs because you have more fiber. And I hope everybody knows that when we eat toxins, even I don't know if you've seen this, in the low carb movement, all these new keto foods are coming out. And when you go and read the label, they're just full of toxins. So I don't care if you put a stamp of keto on there, you're still dealing with a toxic bomb that's going to make you insulin resistant. So let's just come back to, let's make sure those three things are in place. And then let's pair that with going periods without food. And it's up to you. You can, the research shows anywhere from 15 hours to 72 hours. There's going to be great healing benefit. And then when you just pair good quality food with different length fasting windows, I think that would solve the metabolic problem right there without even counting a single macro. Wouldn't you think that same thing?
Yeah, I think that's the other thing. There's so much involved, and that's why I love talking to you, because right now the argument is like, okay, the satiety per calorie, what kind of foods have the most satiety per calorie? But the problem is a lot of the people we deal with, they're not even eating because they're hungry. They're not even hungry a lot of the time. Satiety is very important, don't get me wrong. But the point is, with binge eating disorder, there's so many people go, I'm not even hungry. I could eat a huge meal and then I go home and want to eat cookies all night still. And it's not really about the satiety part of it. So we have drugs that can help with satiety, right? But if satiety is not the issue, is that drug going to help you?
Right. And so this is such a good point. In Fast Like a Girl, one of the 6 fasts that I map out is the dopamine reset. And in studying that fast and applying it to my community, what I found is that people who are obese, now this could, we have a lot of eating disorders that are quite rampant. That's one thing that's been, since I last talked to you, I'm just shocked at how much of the 20 and 30-year-olds are dealing with massive eating disorders. But in the study that I quote, it showed that people who are obese are not getting the same dopamine response from their food. So they keep eating more and more and more because they need to be able to get that elevation of dopamine. Remember, dopamine's the molecule of more. So, and it needs novelty. So when we're eating the same things over and over again that are wrong, in the beginning, they may have given us a dopamine rush, but now they're not giving us the same dopamine experience. So what we start doing is eating more and more and more of it to get that dopamine. But you pair that with all the other ways we're getting dopamine through our phones and, all the instant world that brings us food to our front door. The fact that we can binge watch Netflix series and we don't have to wait a week for the next episode to come out. We are so dopamine saturated. So when we look at just the satiety conversation and why we eat, I think you got to bring dopamine into it. And what can we do to reset these dopamine pathways so we can eat a simple meal and have pure joy with it?
This is such a huge area, and every time it goes to this, it makes me laugh, and it makes me frustrated. There's a lot of emotions that come up because way back on the 10th episode of this podcast and 13th episode, we talked about addiction and diet. And so people said, well, doctor said like you should lose your license for even claiming that it has anything to do with each other. But we were seeing in our practice, we were just observing. We're like, we don't have causality, but what we're seeing is when people get their diet right, all of a sudden they stop watching pornography, or they're not going out and eating cookies as much, or they're not drinking or smoking as much because they're even. And if you're a stress eater and I get your stress better, then maybe you don't need to stress eat as much for this dopamine effect of trying to make yourself feel better.
This is the perfect example. So now you get really good, solid, healthy, fiber-filled fuel into you, and there's a different response, dopamine response in your brain. And because of that, you're not going out looking for dopamine in other areas because you're getting it from your food. And then the other piece of that I'm really seeing across my platform is every once in a while, throw a 48-hour fast in there and you reset the whole dopamine pathway. Plus, what the literature shows us is that actually you create new dopamine receptor sites. So you have more available receptor sites for the dopamine you're getting from the food that you're eating. So we have the dopamine's the most misunderstood neurotransmitter because what we think it's like what we're all chasing, but dopamine's never satisfied. It's the molecule of more. So if we're always chasing the dopamine rush, you're never going to be satisfied. So you've got to start to look at how you can satisfy serotonin, which is the neurotransmitter that comes in after dopamine, but also how you can keep these receptor sites and these pathways very clear and unsaturated. It's a little bit like it's insulin resistance a little bit with the neurotransmitter system of dopamine. But I think right now we are in the biggest dopamine resistant society that we have ever been in. And food is a big part of that, which is why you see all these other, other tools that people are using for dopamine emerging.
Yeah, the ding on the social media. Someone you got likes, you got all these things that we constantly seek, and we need that constant rush going. Yeah. And when we don't have it, we don't know what to do. And the other thing that I love that we're talking about, that it's really counterintuitive to me to a degree, but I've had several women that have binge eating disorder. They're doing more fasting, and guess what? They're binging. They don't think about binging. When they eat, they want to eat healthy food. And it's shocking because we've been told if you deprive someone of something, they're going to binge even more, and it's going to make the problem worse and worse. But that's not what I'm seeing clinically. Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm so happy you said that, because when I wrote Fast Like a Girl, this conversation came up multiple times. Like, how are we going to address the body positivity movement? How are we going to address eating disorders that are rampant? And clinically, I saw the same thing. When I taught a woman who had an eating disorder how to fast, and I walked that path with her. I am not saying that anybody who has an eating disorder should do this journey alone. They should do it with their doctor. But if I walked that path with her and I taught her what neurochemically was happening in her body when she fasted, and then when she ate, I taught her how to eat to have the emotional response she was looking for in the control of food, or the binge eating, or the bulimia, or whatever she was doing. And I brought her back down to the fundamentals. It totally changed her relationship to food. And I've seen this over and over and over again. But, going the journey on your own, it can set off a lot of triggers when you start to go without food, which is why you got to work with doctors like you that can walk that path and be able to kind of guide you and hold your hand until you start to get this new relationship with food and the absence of food. Because I think we think of the absence of food, a lot of women especially think of it as control. It's how I can control my environment, or how I can control my health. I'd like women to think of it as it's when I put myself in a healing state. And then when we bring food back in, I can control my health as well through the quality of food. I can control my moods through the quality of food. I don't have to gain weight when I eat the right foods and pair it to the right fasts. Now that fasting lifestyle becomes this guide that has a sense of control in it because you're leaning into these core principles that you never got and you should have had at 13 years old.
Yeah, I think stepping back into also what we started this, like, how come there's no focus on women's health as far as these studies are done, or that we understand it's not, men and women are going to have different responses to different fasts. And then along that, I would like to ask you, because this is the question that my postmenopausal women ask, like, how am I supposed to know if I'm supposed to eat more carbs before my period, when I'm not having my period anymore? How do I know when to eat more carbs and when not to? Can I just cycle at any time? So what would you tell those people too?
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I don't think, it's funny because I've been out talking on a lot of podcasts about Fast Like a Girl, and all the postmenopausal women are like, what about me? What about me? So here's the general foundational idea that all menopausal women need to know is that after 40, your ovaries go into retirement and they stop making as many sex hormones. And so that process of the ovaries shutting down takes around 10 to 15 years. It's not like overnight, one night you're good, the next night you have no period and you're fine. It's a continual process that your body has to get used to. So with that in mind, there's a lifestyle that has to shift. And I believe that there are 5 things that women need to do after 40 to accommodate for this loss. And I wrote about this in a book that actually I revised and is coming back out in June. Hay House bought it and they're putting it back out with a new sleep chapter. It's called The Menopause Reset. And I go through each one of these 5, but let me share them with you briefly because they tie into this conversation. Women over 40 need to fast. Like, if you're not fasting, you're crazy. And let me tell you why. Estrogen, as it goes down after 40, makes you more insulin resistant. So the diet you ate at 35 and 25 that kept you the weight you wanted to be, it's not working for you at 45. So you've got to experiment with these different length fasts that I've been chatting about. The second thing is you've got to learn how to cycle in and out of carbohydrates. And I'll talk about how you do that here in a moment if you don't have a cycle. But we're meant to have, as women, whether you're postmenopausal or you're, in your childbearing years, you need times where you have a lot of carbs and times where you have no carbs. We're meant to cycle in and out of that. The third we've talked about here, which is your microbiome. So many women have been on birth control for decades. They've been on have done steroids and antibiotics, and their microbiome is not diverse. So we got to bring back vegetables, nuts and seeds and things that will feed that microbiome so it grows. The fourth one is we got to help women understand the adverse effects of something as simple as putting toxic makeup on, or washing your clothes in a toxic laundry detergent, or your favorite perfume that is full of phthalates, that is an endocrine disruptor, throwing off your hormonal system. And then the last piece is really understanding that after 40, we've got to have some variation with stress. We can't be stressed all the time. We've got to be able to have more periods where we calm and we pause and we pour into ourselves. With that in mind, with the principles of Fast Like a Girl for postmenopausal women, I recommend that you move to either a monthly or a weekly cycle. And what that would look like is like 5 days a week, you intermittent fast, you can do keto. 1 day a week, you stretch your fast. Maybe you protein load that night, so you're getting more protein for your dinner. You can do OMAD that night. And 1 day a week, you're not fasting and you're bringing your carbs up into that 150 gram, 200 gram net carbs, which is a lot for somebody who's a low carb lover. And that way you're addressing both estrogen and progesterone. So that's one way to do it. The other way, and this is a really fun way, and I don't know if we talked about this when I came on your other podcast, is we can start to take postmenopausal women and map her food and fast to the moon. So when you look at the moon cycle, if we didn't have blue light, most women would start their period on a new moon, and on the full moon, that would be ovulation. So in Fast Like a Girl, I have a 30-day fasting reset. I have a fasting cycle. All of that could be mapped to the moon cycle. And now you have a rhythm to look at, because a postmenopausal woman doesn't have a menstrual cycle to look at. So that's kind of the nutshell of the postmenopausal conversation. I know there's a lot there, but again, this isn't a one size fits all conversation. This is helping women understand that they need this ebb and flow. Doesn't matter if they're 25 or 65.
Because you also do a 30-day reset. So if they're doing that, does it matter when they started in their cycle, or where it would have been, or how does that make a difference?
So what we did in my community is we took all the postmenopausal women and we said, okay, day one of the reset should be the new moon. So go look at the moon. And when you see the new moon, start day one. It's a 30-day reset. Go all the way through according to the moon. Now, if it's like 2 weeks until that point, then look at the full moon. Full moon's ovulation. So it's going to be about day 13. And then you would come in at the reset on day 13. So that's
awesome
how
stuff.
we've done it.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I think there's so much that we still have to learn. Are there any other tips that you're learning, or different responses you're seeing in patients that would be helpful to share?
Well, so with postmenopausal women, I mean, menopausal women in general, I think we have to realize what's happening, what we're losing as we go through that experience. And I don't know if you're having this in your office right now, but there's a ton of conversation about HRT. HRT is kind of making a comeback. And there's some things that are really good about it that I think are interesting for us to look at. But the part of the hormonal conversation that we're not having is that also after 40, what's happening is estrogen and progesterone are major precursors to our neurotransmitter system. So what I'm starting to see is that you take a postmenopausal woman, and the evidence is, the research is showing that depression, anxiety, especially depression, are higher after 45. So I don't know if we talked about this on the last one, but the most common time for a woman to commit suicide is from 45 to 55. And that's because she's starting to lose estrogen and progesterone. So she doesn't have this precursor for dopamine, serotonin, and GABA. So we've got to help her now look at, how do I raise those neurotransmitters? And some of that we can do through food. Like, we know serotonin likes more carbohydrates. So this is why we got to bring some more carbs into the picture. We know dopamine likes novelty, which is why we can't keep eating the same way over and over again. We've got to vary our foods. And we know that GABA is what is going to calm us. So where's our breath work? Where are we leaning into some activities and meditation that are going to help to bring that calm back and facilitate GABA, like 4-7-8 breathing, 4 through the nose, hold it for 7 and out through the mouth for 8. We know from neuroscience actually stimulates GABA. So women over 40, in the conversations I'm having, we've got to also bring the neurotransmitters into that conversation as well. And this is advanced. Now we've gone advanced.
Yeah, this is such a huge deal. And I'm so glad we're discussing this, because so many times I'll tell a patient, look, take a breath, chill out a little bit, like relax. You're always on overdrive. And my patients that I see that are stressed intense, the first time I meet them, I'm like, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a hard road, because you're stressed, you're tense, you're not sleeping, you're not preparing your food, you don't have time for this, you're weighing yourself 6 times a day. And sometimes it's the overachievers who really, really struggle, and people who say, yeah, I'll do my best type thing. And, if I blow it sometimes, I'm okay. And that may be part of that, where if they blow it one day and then they're getting that carb load that they need, their body's telling it's not a moral failure. It's that your body's telling you what you need, just like those 5 days of craving carbs before your period. I never even considered that till I talked to you. I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Why would you crave it like crazy during that time specific? Because your body wants you to prove to it that you have enough resources to get pregnant.
Yeah.
So if you're not getting resources, like this is not the time to get pregnant, or if you're totally stressed, or if you're working out all day and not eating, all these things that we can do to increase that cortisol level.
Yeah. The hardest person to teach this to is the overachieving, hypervigilant woman. It is the hardest because what she will say to you, and I'm sure you see this in your clinic, she'll say, I'll do anything you tell me to do, anything. And then you say, I need you to eat more carbs and I need you to relax. And she's stuck. She's like, what? I need you to slow down. I need you to learn how to pace your life and your food and your health habits with your cycle. And that's going to require that you can't push. And this is the hardest thing about hormones is you can't muscle your way to better hormonal health. You just can't. Men can, because testosterone is the driver. It is motivation and drive in both men and women. So if we're going to increase testosterone, yeah, you can muscle your way to that. That's going to be fine. Estrogen also could do pretty well with the muscle grit approach, but progesterone doesn't. And you've got to learn to soften. And that's the part for females that is really interesting because we are meant to have more of a soft approach to everything we do in life. One of my favorite books, I don't know if you've ever read this book, but I recommend all women read it, is called Rushing Woman Syndrome. And it was written by Dr. Libby Weaver. And I had a friend that recommended it to me, and she had to recommend it to me about 4 times. And I laughed
because you didn't have time to read it, right? Yeah.
I told her that. She's like, have you read that book? I'm like, this is going to sound really silly, but I don't have time to read it. But when I finally sat down on vacation and I read it, I cried because I realized, and I read it, I'm 53 now. I read it at 45. And I realized that everything that I thought was amazing about my health habits was actually destroying my hormones. And the amazing things that I knew about myself at that time is that I had a ton of discipline. I have a lot of grit. I can put my head down and do things even when they're difficult. But just because I can do that doesn't mean that's hormonally right for me. So the softening has to come back into healthcare for women to be able to thrive. And the type A overachiever woman, this is the hardest concept to grasp.
Yeah, and it's true. And especially with women who struggle with diabetes maybe in their life, when you say, hey, liberalize your carbs, sometimes it's such a hard thing. So what would you tell that postmenopausal female who's struggling with some hyperglycemia and saying, I'm afraid to go up on my carbohydrate intake as a result of that?
Yeah. So here, it's a great question. I like this step approach. So for that woman, the first step is let's just start to teach you metabolic switching, where you are eating and then you have periods of time where you are fasting. And you might start with 13 hours and learn to switch in and out of those two. Then the second step is let's start looking at your carbohydrates differently. So there are man-made carbs and there are nature's carbs. And what we want to do is switch you over to primarily nature's carbs, which are our potatoes, our sweet potatoes, our fruits, our vegetables, and get away from the breads, the cakes, the pastas, and the cookies. So when I say carb in my head, I mean nature's carbs. So let's get her to do that next. Then the third step is, do you understand ketosis? Do you know what gets you into ketosis? And are you able to even get there? Because what I see with a lot of women is that they are like muscling their way into ketosis. And then they're like, I've gone extremely low carb and I'm getting no ketones. And so we got to kind of practice the art of ketosis. Once you have those 3 steps dialed in, Now, if you have a cycle, let's start to look at periods where you're going into high carb, nature's carbs, going into low carb, and going back and forth between the two. When you get to that place, this is crazy. And I really want people to hear that. When you get to that point of your journey with food and fasting, you will lose weight when you eat carbs, nature's carbs. And if you time that, if you're not a postmenopausal woman, you time that to your cycle, you will start to see that when carbs go up, your glucose goes down, ketones go up, and you drop weight. It makes no sense when you're hearing this from a low carb, keto, enthusiastic point of view. But when you start to really play with these qualities and time them to fasting, and then you learn how to put it into the right part of your cycle, you start to see that carbs are not the enemy. They actually are able to help you get into ketosis differently. And that's a mind-blowing idea to a lot of women. Postmenopausal women, a lot of them that go into the ketogenic state, they get such great results that they're not willing to let go of the rigidity they've created in the low carb life that they've created. But if they even just step out once a week, maybe twice a week, and then they go back in and they get to know themselves a little differently that way, they're going to see better thyroid production, which is going to help with metabolism. They're going to see hunger change. They're going to see anxiety change. They're going to sleep better, which fat burning happens when we sleep. So it's so much more than just what are your macros. It's so much more. And that's the conversation I'm trying to open up.
Yeah, that's a huge deal. And it all ties back to with your oxytocin, cortisol. I mean, if you're too strict, you start spiking your cortisol up and then your sugars are going. So basically the way I've been looking at it and maybe explaining it to patients, like, look, it's kind of like you're a student in college for the first time and you start spending all the money on mom's credit card and they go, wait a minute, no more. We're going to go broke. So we're going to take your credit cards away. We're going to give you cortisol, which is going to let you have some cash spending money, some extra sugar floating around the bloodstream, but you can't get to the bank. So we're going to block you from getting to the bank, raise up your insulin levels and all this. And it makes sense when your cortisol is high, your conversion from T4 to T3 drops because your body says, why would I want to speed up your metabolism when you're not being responsible when you're spending all your money from the bank, right? So yeah. How all these things interact with each other to understand. It's like, okay, if I give you a little extra spending money and then that way you don't have to, deplete your bank stores.
That's
so
right.
Much,
So on that topic, it's a good analogy, by the way. I love that one. Maybe because I have college age kids. So
yeah. And you realize like, oh, no more.
I'm familiar with that scenario. But here's the thing that I want everybody to know. And I know that you and I chatted about this on the last one. We're just hormonal illiterate. Like we don't understand hormones. Even doctors don't understand hormones. And when you look at hormones, they don't work in isolation. They work in combination. And just because you produce a hormone doesn't mean you're able to use that hormone. So you could, to your point on T4 and T3, we can get the thyroid to make T4. The brain might be coordinating that really well, but T4 is not breaking down into T3 because stress is high. Maybe you're making more reverse T3. The liver's burdened, so it can't break that down, and your microbiome is decimated. So you walk into your doctor's office and they're like, oh, your thyroid's off, TSH is low. Let me give you a medication. And what you don't realize is that the reason it's low is because your liver and your gut couldn't break that hormone down so it could get into the cell. So with hormones, there are 3 steps. There's the production, there's the metabolizing of it or breaking it down, and then there's, can it even get into the frickin' cell? That the hormones, I read this quote the other day and I've been really geeking out on it. Hormones tell your cells what to do. They are the commander of the cell. If your endocrine system is producing them, but it can't get in the cell so the commander can go in there and tell the cell what to do, it doesn't matter how much levothyroxine synthroid I give you. It doesn't matter how much HRT or bioidenticals I put you on. It has to be able to get into the cell to orchestrate the action that cell is supposed to do.
Yeah, it's so amazing. Just these little things like not eating all the toxins, all the things are going to plug up all the receptors in the cells, and then exercise and activity and all these other things that play a role in hormones and how they're going to interact with each other. It's so complicated, but it's so simple too in certain ways. When you go, okay, let's just take out the biggest offenders, right? And then we figure out. So instead of worrying, fighting whether everyone should be eating the same diet, say what works for that person in front of me. Where are they hormonally? Where are they in their menopause? What are their testosterone levels maybe? And then realizing, okay, if we're exercising, is it ever going to, if we're not excessively exercising, but there's going to be benefits to the hormone system that you're exercising, telling your body, hey, you're at least taking care. You're not just sitting there starving to death. You're doing something, trying to get more food in the system.
That's right. That's right. And that's why I think the door into this conversation, if people are listening, they're like, whoa, I'm overwhelmed. Mm-hmm. The door in is just understand your hormones. Like, let's start, both men and women and doctors and healthcare professionals. We got to understand the personalities of these hormones. And then we've got to build a lifestyle around these. I think one of the things that we've done wrong in medicine is that when hormones go off, we don't address lifestyle. We just medicate. And what I want to start to see is, let's bring hormone knowledge back and let's bring lifestyle back. Now, once you have those two things dialed in, now if medication is necessary, I get that there's times and places for those. But we're so quick to try to throw a medication at it without even knowing. Like, I can't tell you how many women are like on HRT and they don't even understand what's going on in the menopausal journey, or how many women are on thyroid medication and it worked in the beginning and then it stopped working and they don't really understand why. So it's like the knowledge has to start first, match the lifestyle to it. And okay, now we can start to have a conversation about meds and supplementation and all of that. But we go at it wrong. We go with the third step first, and then we try to figure out the other two, which leaves us all confused.
Yeah. And it's the same thing as like, the doctors are looking at TSH only a lot of times. So they throw a T4 at you. But if you can't convert that to T3, you have a low TSH, but you feel like garbage. And so many women over my career have said, I just don't feel good. I know my TSH is normal, but I feel terrible. I never checked T3 back then, and now I realize, oh my goodness, you're not checking a free T3. Now you look and go, oh my goodness, there's a lot of stuff that we can, hormonally change. And if you have a block in one of those steps, giving the upstream stuff is not going to be helpful if you're not fixing that cortisol, and that's why it's so. And for me, after I talked to you, and plus knowing inherently, just watching stress out people don't lose weight. And I always assumed it was just because we get stressed and we stress eat. But there's a ton of hormonal stuff that's going on. Even if you're eating a perfect diet, if you're stressed and not sleeping, you're worried about your kids all night, and you can't, you can't get rest, and you don't shut your brain down, like you're saying, just doing some box breathing. It sounds so hocus pokey or whatever to people, but if they just breathe and relax, and I've had times, and I had patients that we get them to breathe a little bit, and their sugars come down immediately, or their blood pressure drops down immediately, and you think, wow. How come we just don't breathe like that sometimes?
It's such a good point. I think because we've made healthcare so complicated, and we've left it in this box of like, you have to be so bright and intelligent and trained to understand healthcare. And we've left the layperson to think that the fancier the health solution, the more I don't understand the health solution, the more complicated it is, probably the better it is for me, like medication. But then we've left in that lens, we've left out the simplicity of something like box breathing and how important box breathing is to bring cortisol down. And once we bring cortisol down, we bring insulin down and we start to regulate insulin. And once we regulate insulin, now our sex hormones balance. So it's the simplicity has to be brought back.
And that just along those ways, so many people I tell them they're so stressed about every macro and everything they're doing. It's like, okay, if you stop stressing, then you could add in some blueberries, and your insulin is going to be better off still than stressing every day about everything you do, whether breathing the air is going to kill you today, type thing. You know, so many people worry about every detail.
Agreed. So I was just having a conversation with a patient this morning, and she was telling me that she was in the middle of ovulation, and she was moving into ketosis. She was like at 0.9, but she had a CGM on and her blood sugar was going up. And I said, and she's like, I don't understand it. Why is my blood sugar going up as I'm in ketosis? So I said, tell me what's going on stress wise. And then she told me like all these big stressors she had that were ruminating in her brain. And I was like, okay, so understand this from your brain's perspective. Your brain thinks it's running from a tiger. Your diet's telling it to move into ketosis, which it's doing, but it also knows that 50% of the fuel source for the brain is glucose. So it's releasing stored sugar to match the stress level that you're at, which is why it's confusing when you're looking at those numbers. And that will mess everybody up because they're looking for an absolute.
No, and that was my struggle. The other irony of all this stuff, I looked, and after I talked to you, I go, okay, I'm going to double check Mindy on this stuff and look at oxytocin, the effects. And it's overwhelming. I have a 2-page slide of all the stuff it does as far as increasing metabolic rate, better mitochondrial function, reproduction health, muscle mass and decreased fat mass, all these things, and bone density, all this. And so all these studies say, yeah, oxytocin is good. So we need to find a drug that will raise oxytocin levels. That was their conclusion. Almost every study around, like, how about going to the beach and sitting there for a day, or reading, or doing something you enjoy, or breathing, or going in the sauna, whatever it is where you find your peace. That's why people, when I talked about this on this podcast, as a matter of fact, that's why I started Life's Best Medicine, because I would talk about, hey, finding your peace, where's your happy place type thing. And they go, just talk about keto. That's all we want. Well, that's part of it. It's part of it, whether you like it or not. Right.
Yeah. So I'm so glad we're talking about oxytocin, because I think the pandemic, one of the things that the pandemic taught us is the lack of human connection hurts us, not just from a mental health, but from a physical health place. So when you look at oxytocin, the biggest challenge we have with it is the half-life is like a couple of minutes. So you get a hug, you get a burst of oxytocin, you feel a little bit better, and then 3 minutes later, you're back not feeling good again. So we've got to build oxytocin into multiple places in our day. And there's a lot of ways we can do that. I mean, the hugs are great, smiles with people, connection with humans, getting out in nature, petting your animal, your dogs. Like, there's so many different ways. But then what do? We're like, I don't have time for that. I can't call my friend. I can't slow down because I'm trying to produce. I'm trying to, manipulate my way into low carb and get myself into ketosis. And that aggression, that hypervigilance is only raising cortisol, which is causing everything you're trying to do. It's making it so much harder. I saw something interesting. It was a reel on Instagram that somebody sent me the other day, and it was fascinating. It was a comparison of what we do here in America compared to the lifestyle in Italy. And, Europe, I don't know if you've spent much time over there, and I'm sure you have a lot of people listening who live in Europe, but the culture, I love going over there, because there's more reverence for sitting at a cafe and having a glass of wine with a friend and connecting and slowing down. It's part of the culture there. And in that, a lot of the health problems we have here in America, you're not seeing in cultures that value community and connection and slowing down. Here in America, what we do is we don't value connection. We don't value slowing down. So we end up in these mental health challenges. So we get a therapist. And I'm not saying anti-therapy, but then what we do is we have to put that into our schedule. And we've got to make sure that we got the therapy appointment mixed with our what we're doing with our workouts. We got the trainer, and then we've got the hyperachiever, in our business, when literally all we needed to do was prioritize friendships and relationships And now we would have solved a whole host of problems. And you can listen to that and think that's woo-woo, but when you study oxytocin, it's legit. And it's something that I think we need to bring back.
Yeah, and you look at it in that, the sense of community, and they talk about the Mediterranean diet. So if you're eating the Mediterranean diet and you're in the middle of New York City fighting with everyone, smelling smog all day, always tense, never have time for your kids, never have time to do what you want to do, you're not gonna have the best health outcomes. It's the Mediterranean lifestyle, really, when they realize, hey, let's go ride our bike down to the store and get our food. Let's go and do this. Let's go for a community walk. Let's play bocce ball, whatever you're doing, and you're connecting with people. That's the big thing, and people really don't understand. I mean, I took criticism for saying, hey, the lockdowns are going to have negative effects on our seniors who are I have patients who didn't see a human face for 2 years. Like they never saw a smile until we did a Zoom meeting and I got to connect with them like this, because you can't catch a disease, believe it or not, and even then some of my seniors were they were having consults with practitioners who were wearing a mask while they were talking to me, because they want to show the image of what was important. Like what was important is for that darn patient to see your smile, to see your facial expressions, and to be able to connect with them. And that's what they were hurting. And so it's amazing. We've really downplayed how much of an impact that has, not having someone hug you, or, during the AIDS epidemic, just giving someone with AIDS a hug, they were just blown away because no one would touch them.
Yeah.
They were like 10 feet away and afraid, and so being a human being, that there's benefits to that.
Oh, it's such a good question. I love where this conversation is going, because I think it's really easy for us, especially in the low carb movement, to be like, well, just tell me the macros, just give me the fasting length. But we can't lose sight of the oxytocin power of a smile. So let's think about this from what you're trying to achieve with your low carb lifestyle. When you are smiling at people and people are smiling back at you, you're getting oxytocin. Now, you do that a couple of times a day, oxytocin starts to balance cortisol. So it'll start to balance the stress in your life. Now that cortisol is a little more managed, you're going to have insulin be better. You're going to move towards more insulin sensitivity, which is what you're trying to do with your low carb lifestyle.
Exactly. Exactly.
So why don't we bring oxytocin into the ketogenic movement? But we're going to have to do it through looking at the subtleties of a smile.
Yeah. And really just not, you don't have to go on Twitter and fight for 2 hours about who's right and who's wrong. At some point, I'm like, that's just going to raise my insulin, lower my, my oxytocin, and mess up my cortisol levels. What do I need that? I'll go sit on the beach or go play with my dog and not have to worry about it. So I think there's a lot of that where, we have to, my background coming from working 16, 18-hour days in a standard medical practice, it was killing me. It was killing my oxytocin levels. It was killing everything. And you don't realize it because you're in the, it goes, like you said, just because you can muscle through it doesn't mean it's the way to do it. If one meal a day isn't working, at some point you go, okay, let me do 2 meals and see what happens. Let me add in a little carbs here and there and see what happens. Now, if it's a disaster, you go, okay, this isn't working. I change tact again, and you kind of figure it out. But I've yet in my life to meet anyone who said, my life was going so great, and then all of a sudden I get rid of all my stress and then I fell apart.
Oh yeah. Nobody says that. No. In fact, a good friend of mine just went through a really nasty divorce. And as she's getting on the back side of that, she hasn't changed her diet, but she's losing weight.
Yeah. Because her cortisol, stress hormones, all that stuff. And just having that relief. I see it all the time when someone's about to retire or they're making a big, huge life decision. Their blood pressure goes high, their sugars are messed up, they're gaining weight. And then once they say, okay, I decided to retire, I just handed my paper to my boss, boom, everything starts getting better, because you start realizing, okay, I don't have to worry about that anymore. But so many people are holding on to resentment and anger and all these other things that are screwing up your journey. Yeah. So those are the big ones. And the other thing I've noticed too is when a patient comes to me and they're like, oh my gosh, I could eat salmon and vegetables and all this, and they're so excited about the journey, and it's fun for them. Other people are sitting there going, oh my gosh, so I can't have cookies, I can't have this, I can't have that, and it's so stressful that it's like, let's take a breath here. What are our goals, and how do we move forward with that? And if it's scary to give up sourdough bread, how about if we do it twice a week instead of 7 days a week, right? Or what can we do that's not overwhelming to you that we can start at least on a path?
Oh my God, there's so much in that. And I think the first thing is that this is where health information on social media has gone awry. because we have too many people that are standing up saying, do this, don't do that. Let's use alcohol as an example. I don't know if you're noticing, everybody's becoming on social media, all the doctors, all the health influencers are anti-alcohol right now. Now, nobody would agree that alcohol is a health food. But what we're doing is we're creating this absolute, like, don't drink alcohol at all. Now, I will tell you, when I have a glass of clean wine every once in a while, I can see it on my CGM that my blood sugar goes down. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is it calms my shit down. Like, it calms me. And so now cortisol is coming down. So in a cycling approach, is that a little dose, like a micro dose of alcohol here and there, a helpful tool for me? And these are questions I'm asking myself. I'm not trying to upset anybody who has grown up in an alcoholic household or anything of that. I'm just trying to create the point that when we start to get dogmatic about our health habits, including keto, that is so good, and we get so rigid with it, to me, it's now as toxic as the drive-through at McDonald's. And we've got to be more curious. We have to have more flexibility. We have to be more loving and kind to ourselves. And we got to get out of the hypervigilance, because both men and women, this is destroying us, because that rigidity raises cortisol.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing, because there's a movement now, healthy at any weight, and all these things, and you go, okay, realize I love myself where I'm at, but I'm not going to leave myself there. I want to get better tomorrow. I want to be able to go on hikes, and so many people have been victim. I see it now. It just, in the last week, I saw two people that really, they have struggles standing up. They have struggles moving, because for so many years, everyone said, hey, just do what you want to do. We got insulin for you. We got all these things. And then once these things start falling apart, you go, gosh darn it, it's going to be really hard to reverse these things, probably irreversible. Once you have neuropathy and your feet are numb, and you have the amputations going in, blindness, and so many of these things I see, it's like, gosh darn it, if someone would just 10 years ago done that, like you said, the same thing you were saying with hormones changing, the same thing with diabetes. It doesn't just happen in a day. Type 2 diabetes doesn't just happen in a day. That we have 10 years warning if we're looking for the right things like insulin and cortisol and all, the what's happening with the sugars and the triglycerides and lipids. And so it's frustrating, because people continue to say, hey, it just you have bad luck. It just happened to you. Well, it didn't just happen. There was a journey of 10 years at least until we started seeing these manifestations. So I think really saying, can I intervene now before things get so out of control, where if you're hurting everywhere, you're not going to be wanting to exercise, right? But if you're 10 pounds overweight, you can exercise. If you're 300 pounds overweight, it makes it a little bit more challenging.
Yeah. And I want to say that conversation should be happening in the doctor's office, like you're having, because what's happened is, let's just use type 2 diabetes as an example. You go into the doctor, and the doctor is like, they're like, you're moving towards type 2 diabetes. Let's put you on this medication. And there's never a conversation around lifestyle. And shame on that doctor. We got to bring lifestyle back. So, but it leaves the patient to think that it's not their responsibility because it's a genetic thing. So I couldn't control my genes. So I got type 2 diabetes. Mom had type 2, dad had type 2. It's not, it's just my fate. That construct and how we look at healthcare, that has to stop for both men and women. And I think a really good way to look at this, for those of you that are listening and you're going into your doctor's office and you're trying to navigate the traumas that happen in there, is start asking your doctor questions like, what is it that I could do lifestyle wise? How could I support this instead of taking medication or with the medication? And that will get doctors to start thinking that this is what you are, the product. They need you to keep coming back. So you've got to bring in your request, and that will change their behavior. Don't you think?
Well, it's a huge issue either way, because the problem is this: the doctor has 6 to 12 to 15 minutes maybe with that patient. So they don't have time to talk about lifestyle. They don't have time to
Mm.
discuss these things in a general practice, right? When you're in HMO practice and you're seeing 30 patients a day, there's no way if you ever want to go home, you can address these things. That's why I was frustrated in that system, because I go, gosh darn it, I can help this person. So now what you and I are doing is podcasts like this where we can reach thousands of people in our same hour that we're going to spend together, but also just realizing what you're doing with community. That's why when my wife said, hey, what do you think of Mindy Pelz? I'm like, who the heck is that? Right. But you were doing community stuff. I said, let me listen to her book. Let me see, and at least listen and go, oh my gosh, like it's what she's talking about is legit. This is real science. This is real data. And I think the problem is the doctors are so overburdened right now with the stress and everything else going on. And they're just not really in tune to saying what's this crazy oxytocin stuff. Unless I can give you a drug for it, I don't have time for it. So they're not going to fix you. And the problem is we need people like you out there who say, hey, I'll help you through this journey and let's do it together. And by the way, there's 300 other people doing it at the same time. I can help you all at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to have to do, because we have such a disaster on our hands. Like we can't reverse this on our own. So just figuring out, getting people saying, hey, you know what, why don't you try Mindy's program and see how you do, rather than struggling on yourself and starving yourself to death and not enjoying life and being bitter and hating the world. You know, there's so much of that. And the other thing is the doctor's going to go, oh, here, you got diabetes, go to diabetes education. And they're going to say, eat 6 times a day, eat carbs with each meal, and you're going to need to keep your sugars balanced. So, but I don't want my sugars balanced at 300 all the time.
I don't know if it's on my end.
Oh, I think we may have just had a bad.
Yeah. Okay, you're back. I lost you for a moment.
But basically saying that the advice they're giving is like, here you go. Go see the diabetes educator, and they're going to say eat 6 meals a day. Here, keep your sugars high at each meal so that you have a stable sugar level. It's like, well, I don't think I want my sugar stable at 300. I'd rather them be at 100 or less.
Yes.
So that's the problem, is that we don't know. Even, I've had people say, well, they should just mandate everyone gets a continuous glucose monitor. I was like, yeah, that's nice. But the doctor's going to look at that and go, hey, you're getting high sugars at 2, 7. And so we're going to give you more insulin at those times. Like, well, wait a minute. Why don't we change what we're eating and doing and our stress levels? And that's why I love the CGM, because I can see the effect of not sleeping, of stress, even of going on vacation and people eat more than they normally do and they lose weight. And you go, stress has to be a factor in this.
Yeah. You know what I think the solution to everything that you just said is we have to create healthcare teams for ourselves. So I did this when my kids were little, because I learned very quickly that even though I had a lot of knowledge that I was going to be able to help my kids with any health issue that they had, I also realized I was going to be very blinded because I was so emotionally attached to them. So what I did is I created a team of 5 different health professionals, and the team ran everything from the conservative pediatrician all the way down to the woo-woo crystal healer that was maybe into herbal medicine. And whenever the kids would get into a little bit of a health crisis, I would look at the team and I'd say, tell me what you think. Tell me what you think. And then I would take all 5 of those opinions and I put it through my own lens, through my mother lens, and say, what feels right to me? So we've created this isolation where we walk into the doctor and that their opinion is the only one that matters. So to your point, what I'm trying to do is educate, men and women, but largely women, so that when they walk into the doctor's office, they're having a different conversation. And to your point, my heart really goes out to doctors that are stuck in the insurance system, that are stuck in, I only can do 5 to 6 minutes with a patient. But what we need to do is open that conversation up and bring other people to our healthcare team, not just allow the one doctor to be that primary source of information.
Yeah, and building a team where we have a unified front, like someone who understands the exercise, someone who understands the nutrition, or just really someone who can get you out of your head when you go, I'm blowing it, I don't know how to get back on track. I mean, we need a team. I'm building a team too, and I see the same need, is that I can't do it all. I can't be the coach, and I can't be the reviewing the labs and doing everything. But as a team, and if they follow up with you one week, they follow up with me the next week, they follow up with someone else, and we may have a different perspective. Well, Mindy's saying this, should we try it that way? Yeah, let's try it that way. Great. Yeah. Let's see what happens. If it doesn't work, I call you and go, this doesn't work, or it does work, right? So it's so much fun. And thanks so much for joining us. Joining me.
Of course, I could talk to you all day long.
I know.
I
Every
feel like
time I'm always like looking at the clock going, shoot, 10 more minutes passed already. Gosh darn it. But it's such a great conversation. I appreciate what you're doing it because I'm learning from you and I'm, I'm implementing it. I'm being able to help people based on what you did. And that's what I love about the podcast is that we have different perspectives. And, some people say, I'm never going to fast. Well, they end up fasting a lot. They go, I fasted yesterday. I skipped lunch and I was fine. I didn't die. And my energy's through the roof and I feel great and I'm focused and I just solved a problem I couldn't think solve. I just had that happen with a patient, just amazing stuff like that the importance of the mental clarity. And, I think the big thing is just being able to take a breath and slow down and say, okay, I don't have to solve all the problems of the world today. What can I put off till next week? And really just having this organization and really just understanding that that's medicine for you at some point to say, I need to go and play with my kids or go out in the backyard and not accomplish something for a little while. But a lot of us are so, we realize it's going to stack up if we don't do it. And how do we simplify life? And I think these are discussions we'll have on the next one of how to, how we're doing it to help people to simplify a little bit and not.
I love that playing catch. I think that's the catchphrase here. Playing in the backyard with my kids is medicine. And if we gave that, if there's nothing else you learn from this podcast, if you understand that human connection is medicine, now you've got oxytocin and all the rest will fall into place. So I love that statement. That's perfectly said.
Yeah. And that's where we will keep it there. And before I say something dumb, I'll end on that. And then, so how do people track you down and find you? And what about your new book that's being revised and how do they find Fast Like a Girl?
Yeah, thank you. So Fast Like a Girl, it's, you can go to my website or fastlikeagirl.com. It'll show you all the different places. Amazon is the primary place, but it keeps selling out on Amazon. We're like in the 4th reprint and it came out in December. So that one is sort of taken the world by storm. And then the Menopause Reset is being revised and I put a sleep chapter in it. It's what the lifestyle women need to change after 40. It will come back out in June. It's available for pre-order right now. Otherwise, you just go to drmindypelz.com and everything you need to know about what I'm up to is there.
Yeah, and I'll have your books in my office too, so my patients can grab it here. And then also, I'm going to get rushing woman syndrome too. Yes. I think that is there a rushing man syndrome too, or do we have to extrapolate?
Well, there should be, but Dr. Libby Weaver is I'm a huge fan of, and you need to bring her on probably either one of these podcasts, but maybe more of the lifestyle one. And because she's a biochemist. So she explains what the rushing lifestyle is doing from a neurochemical standpoint. And it's really good. And she's such an amazing woman. So yeah.
Awesome. I'll try to drag her on if I can, if she'll lower her standards a little bit. And also guys, Fast Like a Girl, I'm telling you, if you read it, it's going to help you too, because you'll understand the physiology of how these things interact with us also. And then we can understand our partner better too, what's happening and have some compassion and understand these hormones can really affect us. And that's why, going back to our initial question, is most of these studies are done on men because it's so much less complicated, hormonally and trying to factor all these things in. And so hopefully we get some changes and figure out how different meds or different treatments are going to work for women in particular. So we don't just have a one size fits all.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a mic drop. That's a hallelujah moment, because that's really what I'm trying to do. And, some of the thoughts that I have for everybody listening is, as you learn these concepts, keep the conversation going. Keep talking about it with your doctor, with your friends, with your spouse. Like, this is what I'm trying to do, is just crack the conversation open. And then we all need to step into it and start talking like this. And the more we do, the more we're going to understand that a woman's hormones, there's like an art to it. There's a lifestyle that fits, but it's going to have these ebbs and flows. And there's an art that we need to learn. And the more we learn the art, the healthier women get. And, honestly, when women get healthy, the whole world gets healthy. So it's really time for us to start to look at women's health from a new lens.
Yeah. And I want to personally thank you for the impact you've had on my wife. It's absolutely astounding. She's always been low carb, but she's really cycled her carbs in and out and her exercises up. And she's I'll be the hero tonight when I tell her that I got to talk to you again. But it's a huge deal of just getting that mental clarity and the focus and feeling well and not have, and as a side, this is an anecdote, but she has a lot of degenerative changes in her neck. So her left arm was going numb. She loves to play the guitar. She gave it up. And just the other day we were out for a walk. She said, my arm hasn't been numb all year, not once.
Yes.
And she goes, it's a miracle really. But she said, I'm going to do, because they recommended getting epidurals and spinal surgery. She's like, I don't really want to do all that stuff. And she's like, if I can do anything health-wise, I'm going to try it first. And so your book was a huge, huge help to her, decreasing inflammation, mental clarity improvements and all this kind of stuff. So, and she has to put up with me. So we have to get her cortisol levels down dealing with me all the time. So, you helped her out a bit on that level too.
Well, now you just need to hug her more and, be kind, especially the week before her cycle, be incredibly kind and nurturing to her. And you will soon be her hormonal hero. So, but I love that story. Thank you so much for sharing.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And everyone, thanks for listening. And I'm seeing comments that your book has helped people. So thank you so much. And thanks for joining me.
Of course.
Have a great one.
You too.